Chapter 5, Japan and Korea, Part 2. This is the portrait of Usuji Shigefusa. He's a military lord or daimyo, so he commanded samurai. He is pictured here in his courtly garments. These emphasized his status in the feudal society. So this figure is actually from a family shrine. So he's not wearing battle armor. He is wearing these courtly garments. You can see that they are these ballooned fabric. He wore a iboshi cap of black silk gauze that has been stiffened with a black lacquered paper lining. So that's his hat. The cap was held in place either by a white cord or was pinned to a top knot of hair. The size and shape of the cap largely depended on the samurai's rank, though by the 16th century the use of the iboshi was reserved for more formal events. Daimyos would frequently keep a simple folding fan tucked in a belt wrapped around the waist. The thing that he is holding is a sheku. It's a flat scepter or ritual baton. It originally came from China and then moved to Japan, and these are typically made out of wood. These were also frequently used in the Taoist and Shintoist religions. So here are another image, both front and back, so you can really see the ballooning of this garment, and so you can really see the voluminous nature of this garment. So here is a image of an actual person, again in this garment, so you can see that it's not much of an exaggeration, the figure that we just saw. So we've got that voluminous nature of the garment itself. There's that fan that we talked about. And there's the sheku that we'd also talked about. He's got a different hat on, but the rest of the garment is very similar. So this is Kongo Rikishi. This is at the south gate of Toraji, which we've already talked about. So this is made using a wood joining technique. We've got this muscular demonic figure in motion. This is typically one of a pair. There's typically two of them. They are these muscular guardians of the Buddha, and they stand at the entrance of many Buddhist temples. They are manifestations of the Bodhisattva Vajrapayini, one of the oldest and most powerful of the Mahayana Buddhist pantheon. According to Japanese tradition, they traveled with Gautama Buddha to protect him. Typically, Buddhism is very much a pacifist religion, but the stories justified the use of physical force to protect cherished values and beliefs against evil. So these are kind of a manifestation of bodhisattvas of power. Kongo Rikishi is the first of the heavenly kings called Neo. The Neo were originally Hindu gods in India who were adopted by the Japanese into the Buddhist pantheon. The Neo, also called Kongo, also came to be considered these aggressive guardian deities in the tradition. There's typically always two of these figures, and they stand at the entrance, guarding it. There's one statue, typically on the right, called Mishaku Kongo, and he has his mouth open, representing the vocalization of the first grapheme of Sanskrit, which is pronounced ah. The typically left figure is Nareen Kongo, and he has his mouth closed, representing the vocalization of the grapheme pronounced hum. These two together symbolize the birth and death of all things. Mishaku Kongo and Nareen Kongo represent the use of power both overtly and latently. They display this energy in these figures. Here are the two figures, Mishaku and Nareen, so you can see what they look like having both of the figures together. So you can see one has their mouth open, one closed, but they both have those rippling muscles. They've got the fabric swirling around them. They are both seeming in motion, both their arms and their feet, so they seem to be actively moving, reacting. So Mishiku Kongo, that's the one with the open mouth, that represents birth. Nerin Kongo, with the sound, with the closed mouth, that is representing death. So these are supposed to represent both birth and life at the beginning of, again, the doorway of the temple, Buddhist temple there. So the wood block carving technique used to create figures like these, and specifically the one we were talking about in your book, this is yosegi, which is using several pieces of wood that are then pegged together. This allows the artist to create these monumental figures with very dynamic poses. It is then covered with layers of gesso. This way they can paint them these bright colors, and sometimes even black lacquer. Now we're in the Muromachi period. This is Haboku Landscape for Son by Seishu Toyo. He is a Gasso, or Zen priest painter. He actually traveled to China to study and make copies of master paintings. He became a master of a traditional Chinese song style called Haboku, or broken ink. These are very popular with the Chinese Chan Buddhists. Spiritual inspiration can be found in these patterns formed by ink splashes onto paper. So he uses just a few marks in order to capture the spirit of an entire landscape. This very much coincides with the Zen Buddhist tradition. We have this transcendental naturalism and spontaneous intuition. Seishu Toyo is considered to be one of the greatest masters of Japanese painting. He was born into a prominent samurai family and was educated to become a Zen Buddhist monk, which he did at age 11. But he really stood out for his talent in painting. So as a boy, he studied under Tensho Shubun, who had been a pupil of the great Teiko Josetsu. He also traveled to China, spending several years there, getting acquainted with several of the great Chinese landscape painters. Many of his disciples used to sign their own works under the name Seishu, so it's sometimes hard to attribute paintings to him or to his students. So we've got this broken ink technique, which creates this almost abstract form. It's very simple, but yet very effective. So here is a Zen garden. So we've talked about Chinese gardens. Remember, they had the rocks and the plants, but you're supposed to walk through them and experience them, interact with them. Zen gardens are going to be very different. They typically use gravel or sand that is raked to represent ripples in water. Zen gardens tend to be relatively small, surrounded by a wall, and is meant to be seen while seated from a viewpoint outside of the garden. These Zen gardens were typically created at temples. Zen Buddhist temples started out in Kyoto during this Muromachi period. They were intended to imitate the intimate essence of nature, not its actual appearance, and to serve as an aid to meditation. So this garden, visitors must view from porches and platforms, and only Buddhist monks may enter. The garden is supposed to tell the metaphorical story of journey through life according to Buddhism. The rocks and forms are meant to evoke imagery of the Japanese coastlines, while some of the rocks are raked into swirling patterns depicting choppy seas. So here's some more views of that garden. So here's that platform that you, the viewer, are meant to visit the garden from. You're supposed to see the garden from this angle. Only the monks themselves are meant to go inside. And there's the temple that it is connected to. Now let's talk about the Himeji Castle. This began in 1581. This is registered as a UNESCO Cultural World Heritage Site in 1993 and designated a national treasure in 1951. It is often called the White Heron Castle because of its brilliant white exterior and resemblance to a white heron taking flight. So it was begun in 1581 by Hideyoshi and then rebuilt in 1601. This is whenever it started getting the nickname of White Heron Castle. We have tall stone walls built to resist cannon fire. It is centered on the Tenshugun, a complex made of the donjon. Keeps and connecting structures are part of a highly developed system of defense and protection. The castle functioned continuously for almost 3 centuries until 1868, when the shogun fell and a new national government was created. So in 1601, Ikeda Teramasa was given control of Himeji Castle as a gift for his support of Tokugawa in the Sekigahara battle. He undertook a 9-year construction program, at the end of which the Himeji Castle assumed its present-day form. The castle included a 5-story tenshu and a middle and outer moat. So let's look at some more images of this castle. So there you really see the beautiful white, and you can see all of the stone walls and how defensive it was. And there, so it's kind of like the European castles where the keep is in the center and the highest area, and then we've got these outer walls around the exterior. Again, we've got the 2 moats around there. So we really get a better sense, I think, of the whole building in this image. And we've got some interesting details. These are some of the arrow holes here, different shapes. All right, this is cypress trees, attributed to Kano Itoku. It's 67 inches high. It's a portable folding screen called a byobu. So these folding screens typically had 2, 6, or 8 panels and were typically 5 to 6 feet high. So originally they were created as a set of sliding doors or panels. Now this is a folding screen. The reason why we know that this particular one was originally sliding doors is because there's traces of the door pulls in the paper. So we think that these doors were actually in the Hakejonomiya residence and was completed around 1590. We think that they were created by Kenyo Itoku, which is one of the most famous painters of that time. We have a gold leaf background and clouds, and this enormous tree that is filling the screen. So we only have a limited number of colors. We also have a very simple image here. The dark blue waters of the pond we can see kind of emanating from the ground there. So this is the whole piece. So your book limits it a little bit. So this is the image your book has, and this is the whole screen altogether. So you can see all of the different parts. You can see the blue a little easier, and you can see how the tree really dominates the painting. All right, so this is an image of a tea house. So let's talk about the tea ceremony. The tea ceremony is called chenoyo, or simply ocha in Japanese. It is a choreographed ritual of preparing and serving Japanese green tea called matcha, together with traditional Japanese sweets to balance the bitter taste of the tea. It's all about putting attention into these predefined movements. It's not necessarily about drinking tea, it's about the aesthetics. The host of the ceremony always considers the guest with every movement and gesture. Even the placement of the tea utensils is considered from the guest's point of view, their angle. Zen Buddhism was a primary influence in the development of the Japanese tea ceremony. There are a couple of good videos on Canvas about the tea ceremony. So this is a tea house. It's typically made of unfinished wood or bamboo, floored with earth-colored tatami mats. You typically must stoop to go inside. This is a symbol of humility. There are small, dark rooms, and you walk through narrow paths before entering the room. This is an image of the tea ceremony. So the woman over here is preparing the tea. Got the whisk, and she's preparing it over here. And these are her guests as they're watching. And so this is a kind of step by step of the tea ceremony. All aspects are ritualized, including the cleaning of everything. And this is a early 17th century tea bowl. So this would have been used in the tea ceremony. The crane scroll. Calligraphy by Honami Kotsu. The painting by Tawaya Sorotsu. Koetsu is one of the most accomplished calligraphers in his day in Japan. So this is part of a 50-foot long scroll. We have birds moving from right to left, which is how you scroll. There's some that are silver colored and others are gold. The calligraphy mimics this motion. So we've got some of these cranes are alone, some of them are with others, some of them are at rest, some of them are in flight. The brushstrokes are simple and the shape of the cranes are elegant. I know this isn't the clearest image, but it actually showed the entire scroll, which I think is helpful. The beginning of the scroll shows a group of cranes flocked on the ground. Eventually, they fly off and out of the pictorial space, only to successively descend back into the painting. They glide over the sea at one point, and then veer up among the clouds, and then fluttering down again. They come to rest with their feet in the water. The artist skillfully uses gold along with silver for the ocean waves to create a marvelous sense of change in the elevation of the cranes in flight. Okay, let's talk about the Tokugawa period now. And one of the elements of Japanese art you're probably most familiar with. And this is the ukiyo-e, or the woodblock prints. They were used as early as the 8th century in Japan to create text, especially Buddhist scriptures. Painter Tawarya Sadutsu used wood stamps in the early 17th century to print designs on paper and silk. In 1765, a new technology made it possible to produce single sheet prints in a whole range of colors. Printmakers now, instead of working in monochrome, were able to use a multitude of colors. The first polychrome prints were calendars made on commission for a group of wealthy patrons in Edo. The woodblock prints of the Edo period most frequently depict the courtesans and kabuki actors of the pleasure districts. Eventually, the subject matter expanded to romantic vistas and finally dramatic historical events. Ukiyo-e translates as pictures of the floating world. For each print, you must have 4 different experts: the designer, the engraver, the printer, and the publisher. A print was usually conceived and issued by the publisher, who was often a bookseller. It was he who would choose the theme and determine the quality of the work. A woodblock print image is first designed by the artist on paper, then transferred to a thin, partly transparent paper. Following the lines on the paper, it's now pasted onto a wooden block, usually of cherry wood. A carver then chisels and cuts to create the original in negative, with the lines and areas to be colored raised in relief. Ink is applied to the surface of the woodblock, typically by rubbing a round pad over the back of a piece of paper laying over the top of the ink board, making a print. Polychrome prints were made using a separate carved block for each color. You could have up to 20 blocks. To print with precision using numerous blocks on a single piece of paper, a system of placing 2 cuts on the edge of each block to serve as alignment guides was employed. The paper was made from the inner bark of mulberry trees. It was strong enough to withstand numerous rubbings on the various wood blocks and sufficiently absorbent to take up the ink and pigments. So the advantage of these prints are that you can make numerous images for a relatively cheap price. So these could be bought by the commoner, more people than just the very wealthy. So this one is by Kitagawa Otomaro. This is Woman Holding a Fan from the 10 Aspects of Physiognomy of Women. So Kitagawa Otomaro is the artist. The publisher is Tsutaya Juzaburo. So this is featuring these women in these idealized images, showing them with beauty, confidence, and power. Kitagawa was born in a provincial town. He went to Edo, it's now called Tokyo, with his mother. He started painting and designing wood block prints of women. In 1781, Otomaro gave up designing prints for books and concentrated on making half-length single portraits of women rather than prints of women in groups, as favored by many of the other artists. At the height of his success in 1804, he made some prints depicting the military ruler Toyotomi Hideyoshi's wife and concubines. Consequently, he was accused of insulting Hideyoshi's dignity and was ordered to be handcuffed for 50 days. This ended his career as an artist. Some of his best-known series are The 10 Physiognomies of Women, 12 Hours at the Quarters, and Women in Love. It's estimated that he created over 2,000 different print designs. So these woodblock prints were imported into Europe in large numbers in the late 19th century. Japan was closed off to the West for a very long time, but we have the Dutch merchants coming in and doing some trading with them, and so they start smuggling these prints out. These were extremely popular. Here is a Kitagawa Otomaro image from our collection. There's another one. So the difference between him and some of the other artists is he's going to focus on this one individual in these images. You're not going to have like a whole big scene with lots going on. As you can see, we've got one individual, maybe a prop or two, maybe one thing happening in the background like we see here, this wonderful painting on the wall. But that's it. This is kind of more unusual for him. We've got a group of 3 women, but again, we have no background. We don't have this elaborate scene. So we do have 3 women, but that's it. Again, these are all from the museum's collection. And now, of course, probably the most famous of all of the ukiyo-e prints. This is, of course, Hokusai's The Great Wave of Kanagawa. So this is from 36 Views of Mount Fuji. So Fuji, erupted in 1701. It's considered to be a source of immortality. From the time it erupted, we have this kind of emphasis on it. So in this image, we've got Mount Fuji here, ironically, very small in the background. And then we have these boats. So we've kind of known this image for the wave, but there's a lot going on here. We've got the boats, we've got the mountain, and then we also have the wave. He was also well known for using this beautiful blue color called Prussian blue. He was about 70 when he created this piece. So the wave in this image would have been 32 to 39 feet tall in real life, and he made somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 prints of the Great Wave. All of the images in this series, of course, glimpse the mountain. Some the mountain predominates, some like this, it is in the background. It's the threatening wave that is the focus really here. And it's so threatening because of the boat. We see these boats full of men. See the men there? There's all these men in the boats. And they are struggling to keep their boats from capsizing. Mount Fuji is the highest mountain in Japan and has long been considered to be sacred. At this time, Japanese were going to make pilgrimages to climb the mountain, and tourists were visiting all the time. And they also wanted souvenirs of this time. So they would buy these ukiyo-e prints of Mount Fuji. So here's a couple of images that I found online of artists recreating or reimagining this scene, in this case with dynamic colors. In this case, this was a group of college students who recreated the piece. Of course, this is a fun sci-fi take on it. Here's another comical take. In this case, they've eliminated the boats and just put the surfer in. And this is a more art historian take, of course, putting the famous life raft in here. Jerichoult's Raft of the Medusa. Another sci-fi take. Moving on. Now let's go to the Meiji period. This is Hashimoto Sarahide, Foreigners in Yokohama. So he typically would do these images of daily life in this international sector of the city. So we have this tall Westerner with these bony cheeks, prominent nose, loosely tied cravat, and he's pulling the curtain back, and we see a Chinese man who is carrying a pair of ducks, probably for dinner. So he is known for these pictures of foreigners as they're visiting Yokohama. He was a member of the Tokugawa shogunate's delegation to the International Exposition of 1867. Sarahide Otogawa was born in Hashimoto in 1807 and was very influenced by Western art. He would sometimes use a bird's eye view depicting his scenes. He was one of 11 Japanese printmakers who exhibited their work at the Paris International Exposition of 1867. He received the Legion of Honor at this event. This is Endo Hiroshige, Ohashi Bridge in the Rain, from 100 Famous Views of Edo. Hiroshige was the son of a warden of the Edo Fire Brigade. Unfortunately, in the spring of 1809, when Hiroshige was 12 years old, his mother died. Shortly after, his father resigned his post, passing it on to his son. Early the following year, his father died as well. He actually was a fire warden at a young age. Thankfully, his actual duties were fairly minimal, but also his wages were small. In 1811, he entered the school of the Yukoi master Otogawa Toyohiro. He received a school license at the age of 15. In 1818, he created his first book illustration. Later, he was able to transfer to his own son the post of fire warden and devote his life to art. We don't know a lot about Hiroshige's actual life. We just mainly know his art. So in the early period of his work, he focuses on figures, girls, actors, samurai, warriors. His second period is his kind of landscape period, where he's really focusing on this like romantic ideal of landscape design. Birds, flowers, things like that. The last stage was this design with, again, landscapes and landscape design, but it's a little more simplified at that point. This is from 100 Famous Views of Edo. He also did famous places in Kyoto, 8 views of Lake Biwa, 69 stations of the Kisekado. So he liked to do these where he would do entire books based on everything that he saw on these trips. It has been estimated that Hiroshige created more than 5,000 prints, and as many as 10,000 copies were made from just a few of his wood blocks. So in this one, we have this Ohashi Bridge in the rain. So we've got this bridge in the rain. It's a very simple image here. We've got the men crossing the bridge, got the rain coming down. The thing is that whenever these images were going into the West, they were very influential to a group of artists. So we actually have several Western artists copying these designs. So this is Vincent van Gogh's Bridge in the Rain. This is his copy after seeing Hiroshige's. So we have all the same elements. We have the men in the rain on the bridge, the water, and the rain coming down, but it does have a very different feel. So again, we have this, it's kind of simplified. I think a lot of the difference is actually the background. The bridge itself is actually pretty similar. But Van Gogh really does bring out his use of colors. The water is very different in his image. So if you're wondering about the border on this is because the Van Gogh actually painted this on a standard size canvas, but he wanted to maintain the proportions of the original print. So in order to do that, he had to paint this faux Asian border to go around it. And the wording, the characters that you see there, he basically copied those from other prints that he had in his collection. So this copying of works from the East, we've seen that with China, with Chinese Ch5, and this is Japanisme, this popularity of Japanese art and culture in the West, and they start copying and trying to kind of mimic these styles in the West. So here's a couple other hiroshikes from our collection. Here's scenes of you. There's Mount Fuji in the background.